Don't want my advice? Then suffer the consequences. Hey all, so this story involves a railway, and the collective agreement that we railroaders operate under. I'll try to simplify it since some terms are industry specific. This happened a few years ago. My crew and I were called for work on a train leaving east from the port. While doing our paperwork at the start of the day, I noticed through our live train tracking system that a westbound train was about 30 minutes travel time out from the yard, but only had 1 hour left on their federal hours of service, which absolutely cannot be exceeded. They also had 12,000 feet of traffic to yard, which alone takes 1-2 hours to compete. As soon as I realized this, I called the local manager, called the DM. Now, I had 13 years seniority at that point. The manager had spent 6 months as a trainee railroader before switching to management. Total seniority, maybe 1 year. I suggested that he swing us to a rescue ticket in the payroll system and we would go out immediately and help that train. Normally this would entitle us to a 2 hours off-duty spacing between tickets, and up to 8 hours rest if we wanted it. But we offered to decline that to help the other crew. He immediately declined and confidently explained that the crew was just fine and they would be setting half their train out en route at a storage track. That move takes even longer than yarding in the port, due to track clearances and stuff needed to allow the moves. So, I just shrugged, hung up the phone and continued with my paperwork. It turned out that even if they had the time on their clock, that track had unreported cars in it, so the DM frantically tells them to make a run for the port. During this time, we had gone out and started working on building our own train. We talked to the inbound crew and agreed to help them land the first cut of cars, and secure their tail cut before their federal 12th required by law. So, there we sat. The inbound crew landed half their train before houring out, and left 6,000 feet of train blocking the only piece of rail in or out of the entire port terminal. DM then calls us on the radio and the conversation went like this: DM, hello crew, I need you down and pull that second cut in to clear the rail. Crew, okay, and then we taxi home? TM, no, you get back on your own train. Crew, no, we only handle one train per ticket, and this ticket terminates at our home terminal, so if we handle their train, we taxi home on pay. You could cancel us and put us on a rescue turn ticket like we originally suggested, but if we do it on this ticket we go home. TM, okay, you're cancelled and called on a turn. Crew, so you're saying we're cancelled? TM, yes. Crew, okay, since we are cancelled after working we taking 8 hours rest, and we are the only crew in the terminal to do this work. DM, wait, what? Crew, so are we cancelled, or there a taxi coming after we yard that train? DM, yard the damn train. Funny thing is, it was a beautiful summer day. If he had just taken my suggestion, we would have yarded their train, and jumped back on ours, making 2 tickets worth of pay, but saving the railroad a lot of headache. Instead, we yarded half a train, and got paid to play on our phones and a 4-5 hours taxi ride, for the same rate of pay as we would have gotten on the 10 hours train trip home. Go home and don't come back till your hair is dried. Fine by me. I'm a dyspraxic, for those unsure what that is. I have no sense of time and my mind works faster than my body, so I can trip and bump into things and get called clumsy and lazy by people who don't understand it. My employer was aware, as I notify everyone and put it on application forms. During my time working in the local hospital as an admin assistant in radiology, I did fairly well attending work on time, but to ensure this happened I sometimes had to miss out steps of my morning routine. Usually things like brushing hair and having to do a messy bun so it looks tidy but can be done in 2 seconds, etc. On this particular day I had a shower, and once I was out of the shower I realized I only had time to dress and get to work, so I must have been on a slow day. I dress as fast as I can and rub my hair as dry as I can and brush it so it's neat but damp and rush to work. Luckily I lived by the back entrance, so only had to walk 15 minutes if that across the site, and I made it on time. Once at work I got logged on and started working when my manager came over and said I should go home and dry my hair. This annoyed me since I was dripping wet. It was a damp but almost dry, so I confirmed they were sending me home to ensure my pay, as if I agreed to leave. They didn't have to pay me, but if they told me to leave they had to pay me. They confirmed that I had to leave and they were telling me to, because I refused to leave willingly for damp hair. I walked home and realized they have no idea if I have a hair dryer or not, and since I'm being paid for the time it takes me to dry my hair, I'll sit watching TV until it's dry. I must have been sat there 2-3 hours and went back in time for my dinner break. Then in the afternoon got back to working. The manager came over to ask what took so long. I responded my hair dryer broke and as you didn't want me until my hair was dry, I waited for it to dry naturally. They never complained about it again after that. I ended up working there 4 years in total and was one of the best people they employed. The manager asked if there was anything she could do to keep me, but since I was having trouble with my personal life at the time there wasn't anything she could do, so she got a collection going for my last day and ended up with that much money. They had a hamper made with personal personalized gifts and had so much left over I ended up with a £50 Amazon gift card too. I offered to do bank shifts where I could to help out and did that for a year before I had to stop that too, but she even now still says she wished she had more people like me were connected on social media on her team, and when jobs came up she offered me them until she retired 2 years ago. Mess with the volunteers? Ready for the comeuppance? This is not my story, this is my mate's story. Let's call him by his nickname Yuyud. Key players: Yuyud petty, friendly, calm, helpful, willing to help anyone in need, respected by the staff and volunteers alike. The designated toxic handler, volunteer, hates volunteers, degrading and hostile towards volunteers, blames the volunteers for everything that goes wrong. Important information: the hospital is powered by volunteers, because it's a non-profit. Without them, the operation power goes cut by half. Story: it was 2020, and the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia. Yuyud was a volunteer at a local hospital, and he was respected by the staff and volunteers alike for his friendly demeanor, calm temperament, and willingness to help anyone in need. He was also the designated toxic handler, the person everyone went to when they needed to rant about something, no matter how small. One day, a new supervisor named Basasu arrived at the hospital. He was from a different province, and he hated volunteers with a passion. As soon as he arrived, he began degrading the volunteers and chewing them out for even the smallest infractions, such as wearing t-shirts and jeans instead of the regulation uniforms. Even though the volunteers' uniform only a red vest with their logo on it. Yuyud and the other volunteers were furious and confused. They didn't understand why Basasu was so hostile towards them. They were the ones doing all the hard work, keeping the hospital running smoothly. One day, Basasu saw Yuyud working on a broken computer in the staff office. He flew into a rage and yelled at Yuyud, "Who let you up here? Get outside and do your volunteer stuff." Yuyud was furious. He went to the break room and told the other volunteers what had happened. Everyone was outraged. In the next week, 7 of the 13 volunteers quit. Malicious compliance: the remaining volunteers stopped doing all the extra things they had been doing, such as bringing lunch for the staff and checking the fleet of vehicles regularly. They also refused to fix any problems that weren't specifically listed in their job descriptions. Even the paperwork only done half because of the job description stated that the EMS need to fill the later half, making work a lot longer to be done. When the hospital manager noticed that the volunteers were gone and expenses were up, he called an emergency meeting. Basasu blamed the volunteers and Yuyud, but Yuyud had a surprise for him. He had a recording of Basasu yelling at the volunteers and mocking them. Remember toxic handler? Yeah, he uses his. To secure the recording. The fallout: the manager was furious. He confronted Basasu, who tried to deny everything, but the video evidence was undeniable. The manager demoted Basasu to staff and destroyed his reputation. His reputation is ruined, and he can't be promoted to more higher position. If he quits, there will be paper trail about his discrimination. TLDR: new supervisor, trying to make volunteer life a hell, got demoted and his reputation destroyed. Mid-2000s company issued cell phone malicious compliance. I work in IT. Some are surprised that I tended to shun cell phones for most of my career. I didn't get one until about 2013, but a big part of the reason was that I knew that, working in IT, if I had one, my employer would expect me to be on call basically 24/7 with no additional pay or anything. There was still is a social expectation that you answer your phone or at least reply via SMS text. No matter where you are or what you're doing. Out on a nice date? Too bad, boss is calling. Dinner with a spouse? Too bad, boss is calling. Driving your kids to some important medical thing? Too bad, boss is calling. If when you aren't quick on answering calls messages, it's always a talking to the next day at the office, despite the fact that 99% of your job can be done remotely. But that's another topic. Always been this way for IT staff. Won't ever change. So, early in my career around 2005-ish, I worked at an SMB of around 50 people. Help desk and network admin. Working for an IT manager who had no real technical skills to speak of, didn't understand IP addresses, how or why different versions of MS Office have slight variations in the user interface, didn't understand how FlexLM floating license checkouts work, etc. but was good with Crystal reports, so they were the IT manager and I was the flunky. This person spent about 80 of their time micromanaging my time and making sure I wasn't idle for so much as 5 minutes of my day. At one point, a person in another department who was working late had some trivial nonsense problem with Microsoft Excel that absolutely 100 could have waited until the next morning to resolve, but was annoyed that the IT manager was beyond clueless to solve his issue at 7:45 p.m. and the regular help desk network admin guy didn't have a cell phone he could call for off-hours support, so he complained. He complained the next morning by storming into the IT office and berating us, the IT manager and I, about how unacceptable the situation was, and then sent a 5-page follow-up email to half the company including the entire executive staff about how intolerable it was that his dumb pivot table crap didn't get resolved in the late evening. So a couple of days later I get pulled into a meeting with the IT manager and the HR lady. Reading the room, it felt like I was about to get fired or something, not for nothing, but I was quite good at my job, and when I eventually quit a couple of years after all this, it took them over a year to find a replacement, but it was far worse. They wanted me to get a cell phone. I politely declined, which they were prepared for as they told me the company would pay for me to get a phone. I asked if I was going to get any kind of salary increase if I was going to be expected to actually answer it. My original employment agreement didn't include any on-call stipulations and was told there wasn't any money in the budget for that, a blatant lie. The CEO sent us the quarterly earnings every quarter. So I said that I'd take a company-issued cell phone, and I'd even answer it after hours without demanding more pay, on one condition. I got to pick the phone and the carrier. They were delighted, agreed in writing, and were almost giddy as I got up and left the room. I found a Motorola Razr at the time, a new and very expensive phone from NTT Docomo, a Japanese phone company, that had the right kind of compatibility to work on the North American cell phone network, but retained a Japanese phone number and had an international roaming plan. I went out of my way to find the worst possible plan, and calling the phone would have incurred two-way international long-distance calling, plus the per-minute international roaming fees and all that. And based on some quick math it would have cost them over $5 per minute in total to call me. A day or two after the meeting with my boss and the HR lady, I requested the follow-up and presented the phone and plan I had picked out. It was clear from the body language that they couldn't tell if I was kidding or not. The HR lady finally realized I was dead serious, and asked why I picked something so expensive. I said with complete honesty, I find it almost offensive that you want me to be theoretically on call for an unlimited amount of time outside of the office, potentially disrupting literally everything I do outside of work hours, but weren't willing to offer me even one penny in compensation. Well, if someone wants to call me for support after hours, somebody somewhere is going to pay for that call, one way or another. They thanked me, said they'd get back to me about it later. The topic of me getting a company cell phone was never brought up again. People don't understand why you're leaving early. First time posting here, but have to get this out. Maybe this could also be posted in our anti-work. I was working for a smallish company, about 60 employees across several locations, IT support for both hardware, laptops, phones and software. When I was hired just under 9 years ago, it was verbally agreed that instead of clocking any callouts as overtime, I would just take the time in lieu. Callouts were always minimal and there were never any issues with me taking the time here and here to make up for it. Any calls in the middle of the night were quickly resolved, and I had no problem getting back to sleep. Appointments in the middle of the day were fine because of the additional hours from whenever. This worked well for almost my entire time there. I also always started early, just depending on when I left the house, got into the office, got my coffee, could have been anywhere between 5 and 30 minutes because I would leave the house earlier so as not to wake the family if school was off that day. I didn't care at that point. It never bothered me. They got free time from me, but again I did not care because honestly what else did I have to do? It was a great job until it wasn't. One weekend I was working on some hardware maintenance, cleaning up wiring, Ethernet, plugs, installing a new UPS that took me the better part of Sunday to complete 6-8 hours. This was understood, approved in advance and appreciated. The following week I decided to start burning those extra hours up. I still came in early as I had done for years, but started leaving an hour early from my regular end time every day if nothing was going on. This is important. If something needed done, I got it done. I was reachable via email until early evening, and phone pretty much 24/7. This particular week was slow so I had nothing going on. I left an hour early for the first 4 days. On Friday, my boss comes to me and gently says, "People notice that you've been leaving early this week. I'd like you to make sure you stay in your office until the scheduled end of day in case someone needs you." I explained to him that I was burning up lieu days and he just reiterated that it looks bad to others. Seriously? You can't tell the others that I work my 40 hours a week, just not at the same time as them? Fine. Cue the MC. I immediately submitted 4 hours of overtime for the hours that I didn't take in lieu. I still showed up at the office at whatever time I got there, but did not start any work until 8 a.m. If asked, I would say sure, 8 a.m. start time. If I got called outside of office hours, depending on how long I spent on the issue, I logged it as overtime. User calls me at 7 p.m. to ask a question. I answer him in 30 seconds, 1 hour OT. When my boss then started to ask, "How come you're submitting all of this overtime?" I responded with a simple "some people don't understand or like me taking loo time. I need to claim it as overtime since I am at my desk from 8-4 because I wasn't available at his beck and call." It ended up costing them more money. 95 of my job could be done from home because of full remote access, but that stupid old school mentality means that people in the office need to see you at your desk all day long. I left the company very shortly after that for a much better paying job with full work from home. Know your worth. Tell me to work when I'm not on the clock, and just happen to be in the building? How about instead I organize the staff into a low-key resistance that lasts years after I left? This will be a rather basic one, but it still warms my heart. I used to work in a trade shop run by a great boss. Everyone got along great, except for one of the department heads. Let's call them B. For reasons unrelated to this story, the boss decided to sell the shop to B, and in the wake, the majority of the staff quits within months, leaving us understaffed. I naively decided to stick it out and assume that B would hire people to fill the empty positions. They don't. We go from a 15-person trade shop down a 5-person within a year, and that includes the 6 people who turned over. One of the many issues that developed, and there were many, was B's inability to schedule, or think through actions to the end, and plan ahead. While I worked there the 2 years with boss, I often came in 10-15 minutes early due to the nature of my commute. I'd come in, unload my stuff, make some coffee, small talk with my co-workers, shoot the shit with my boss. But we never really started work until everyone's scheduled start time. When B took over, the moment you stepped into the stop, B immediately started to bark orders at you regardless if you were in the building 15-20 minutes early. Mostly it's because B was in a rush to get something done. They just remembered when I, the now most senior person left at the shop from the old regime, would point out we technically weren't on the clock yet for another 15-20 minutes and I want to make coffee. B would just snap at you, telling to do it now because so-and-so is coming right at opening. So I started to wait in my car, bring in my coffee from home, and would only walk in the door as the last minute was changing. I was technically never late to work, and was ready to work the moment I stepped through the door. I don't know if B caught on, but the rest of my staff did and followed suit since I told them to. For the remaining months I lasted there, all my co-workers would still often show up early to work, but all wait in the vehicles. At some point one of them had a minivan and we all party in there and go in as a group. Anytime a new person joined because someone walked off, we would also warn them of what would happen. It's been several years since I worked there. I do not know any of the current staff beside B. I happened to be doing an on-site install nearby at the time that shop would open in and looked over into the parking lot in front of the shop, like clockwork. A minute before the shop was scheduled to open, about 6 people got out of their vehicles and headed in. I may not work there, but it's nice to see my resistance still exists. Added updated B's name edit too for those asking. Just didn't clock in early and get overtime. It's simply because I didn't want to. 1. I deliberately arrive to work early so that I can get into the correct headspace to deal with B, and I want to hang out with the staff for a few minutes before have to deal with the daily shit show. 2. At that point, I had just put to end the 11-hour work stays I was putting in to deal with cleaning up B's mess. I was willing to help out since I felt bad that half the staff left and they just needed the help. I also like money, but after 6 months of the same mistakes happened with no effort on B's part to even acknowledge there are issues, I burned out. So informed B that I was only working 8 hours days. I will not come in early or stay late. I only lasted another few months before I found another shop. 3. I'm a vindictive person, and at this point I was enjoying watching the world burn around B. This cell phone provider won't work for me. Not my story, but my father's. Takes place probably 20 or so years ago in Midwestern US. At the time of this story, my father had his cell phone plan with a V network. Not sure if company names are allowed, but whatever, you probably know who I'm talking about. He chose that provider because he lived in a rural area and at the time that was the only mobile provider that worked for him. He researched this as best as his low-tech redneck mind could handle. This was the only viable option. My father has been in sales for most of his working life, specifically insurance sales. He is darn good at it, makes sure the client is taken care of the right way, the way he would want to be taken care of. He also is the kind of guy that doesn't care where you are on a company's organization chart. He'll tell you exactly how it is with want and disregard. If he's wrong, he'll admit it, but if he's right about something, he'll make extra sure you know about it. The bean counters at insurance company he worked for decided they would provide him with a business cell phone, but with a different provider than the V company. He called his boss and said this probably isn't a good idea. It'll be in roaming where I live and it'll cost a ton in roaming charges. Side roaming back in the day? Boss says nope. Company knows best. Use this new phone. Pops says sure thing, boss man. MC Hammer time. So he gets new phone. Uses it exactly 1 month's billing cycle. Uses it for all calls, business calls, personal calls, random calls. To make a reservation at a restaurant, everything. Use the company phone. Instead of the company paying around $50 or whatever it was for his phone plan, because of roaming in his area as he said it would, the cost of his phone bill was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,400. Boss calls him on his personal phone and says put the company phone down. Shut it off. Don't touch it again unless it's to put it in a box. We're overnighting you a new phone on the V network. And you will send the other phone back to us. My dad, in his ever so smart ass way, said next time, maybe pay attention to the guy who knows how it is. His moral every time he tells this story is that education does not always mean the same thing as intelligence. Thanks for reading. You, a senior citizen military veteran, can handle my hyperactive 7-year-old? Be my guest. This happened years ago with myself, a friend, my then boyfriend and his daughter. We couldn't do much for toys for this particular Christmas, but our family was nominated for an event called Shop with a Veteran. It's where kids get to go in a Walmart with a veteran and can pick out their own Christmas gifts with a set amount of money donated by civilians and other veterans. The thing is, only the veteran can go in with them. I had later found out it was because some parents had earlier tried to persuade their kids to get things that were more catered to the parents or another child instead of the child who was nominated. I can definitely understand the rule being enforced for this, but some children should have their parents with them. My boyfriend's daughter was diagnosed with severe ADHD and had taken her medication, but she had gotten very excited when she found out about going to get Christmas gifts of her choosing. We found the lady hosting and explained to her about the daughter's ADHD and how she can be a whirlwind when she gets excited and how she doesn't like to listen to people she doesn't know. When we explained to the lady hosting the event that one of us should go in with his daughter just to make sure she behaved, she understood and talked to the veteran who was going to shop with the daughter. He immediately argued, claiming he was tired of parents wanting to pressure their kids to getting things they didn't want, and he wanted the daughter to have a good time picking out her gift. The lady tried to explain the situation, but the veteran wouldn't hear any of it. I clearly remember him grumbling at us. I've been to war, I can handle a kid. Well, in that case, after the veteran took the daughter into the store, we saw two friends going in. We didn't know they'd be there, but we were happy to see them. My boyfriend caught up with them and asked one of them if they could keep an eye on the daughter and the veteran. My boyfriend then emphasized that the veteran clearly thought he could handle his daughter, so let him handle her. We waited for about an hour when the veteran returned with the daughter. She was grinning ear to ear at all the presents she was able to get. The veteran looked exhausted and like he had been through hell. He then yelled at us that the daughter was the most disrespectful brat he had ever met. How she had to touch all the toys and threw everything she wanted into the shopping cart, and she was a nightmare when he told her she couldn't have everything she picked out. My boyfriend packed his daughter's gifts in the car and then took her back inside to start our grocery shopping. We couldn't do it while she was in there with the veteran because we had to wait outside for when they were done so we could immediately take her and her gifts. Understandable. They weren't babysitters. I decided to talk to the veteran and told my boyfriend that I'd meet him inside. I asked him if he was okay. He said he was fine, but why didn't we tell him our daughter was crazy? I promptly corrected him by saying SHW was not crazy. I explained her ADHD to him and how we only wanted to go in with them so she would behave. We know that she knows to behave around us, school and grandma's house. How she doesn't like to listen to strangers, even if we know them and she doesn't. I apologized and told him that not all parents want to go in to use this as an excuse to get their own gifts. Some genuinely just want to make sure their kids behave. Later in the store, our friend caught up with us and told us everything that happened. The daughter had run up and down the toys aisles. She kept going back and forth from the toys to the cart, throwing in anything she could get her hands on. She even screamed at the veteran when he put some of the toys back. Typical behavior when her normal authority figures aren't watching. When she was satisfied with toys she did get, she kept asking for candy at the checkout, which she asks anyone for when we go to the store. It was amusing to us that a grizzled military veteran was outmatched by a hyperactive 7-year-old. We've since then been better off and we donate money to this event every year and even toys for any toy drive they have. The veteran still does the event, but he's more understanding when certain children need their parents to go with them. He does get the odd pushy parent now and then, but he handles them rather than flat out denies all parents going in. You should have better worded your threat because I saw it as an opportunity. Some years ago, I was 25M and broke up with my 24FGF. She had cheated on me after 7 years together, and where we lived, we had a 1-month notice to leave our apartment. In order not to pay 2 rents, I had to wait until the end of the notice before moving out. In the end, She kept the apartment with a new roommate, but we still had to pass the landlord's inspection to get our security deposit back. I moved out something like 5 days before the inspection date, and living with someone you dumped for almost a month can be hard. She was either trying to convince me to stay with her, either trying to make my life miserable because I dumped her. As you can guess, when I moved out I wasn't thrilled to know that I'll have to come back some days later to refill holes, repair some stuff and clean the apartment with her before the inspection. But hey, I'll do it. So, just before leaving, sitting in my car about to start the engine, she tells me you'd better really help me for the cleanup. You either clean really good, or I keep the security deposit. Maybe a bit of context was lost in translation because this discussion wasn't in English. The way she worded it could mean either a threat or a choice. The tone and context sure enough clarified that it wasn't supposed to be a choice. Some things to know: I sure don't love doing chores, but cleaning isn't an issue for me. For her, most of it isn't either, but in the 7 years we were together she never cleaned the toilets or the bathtub drain siphon, because it disgusted her, so I did it. And she did other stuff to compensate. Money-wise, I was a working IT engineer, and she was a student. So the security deposit, 300,400 euros each, may be huge for her, but I didn't care that much. So I simply replied okay. She looked at me a bit confused, not understanding my answer. I said okay, keep the deposit and do it all by yourself. I didn't wait for an answer, drove off, and when I arrived I messaged the landlord with my ex in CC telling them to send the full deposit to my ex and none to me, and I never set foot in this apartment again. Added, I didn't think this post would have so much attention. Some info since people asked and not everyone will check the comments. She kept the apartment, but since my name was on the contract the landlord had to refund the security deposit and have a new one in order to make a new contract. Legal reasons, I guess. Bathtub siphon, bathtub drain. English is not my first language. Google Translate said siphon, and it seemed weird but close enough where I live. Usually the landlords always find ways to keep at least part of the security deposit. This landlord was the exception and the first honest landlord I encountered, and refunded her the whole amount. I didn't trash the place before leaving or anything else because I didn't want to do a petty revenge or something like that. My goal was to get out and avoid seeing her again as much as I could, not take revenge. This was more than 5 years ago and I had time to move on since. Don't worry for me. I discovered this sub yesterday and it made me think about this story I was kinda proud of, so I thought let's share it.